I want to tell you about the year I paid for my own burial. I'm 87 years old. I did the arranging myself at a kitchen table with a pencil and the back of a seed envelope. And when it was done, there were 6 things settled. 6, not 5 and not 7. 6 things I did not want my children deciding in a single week in a hallway, with their eyes red and their good sense gone out of them. I felt no bravery when I finished, and no pride either. What I felt was honest. The way a man feels honest when he has finally swept out a room he had been walking past for years. Come sit down a minute and pull the chair closer to the heat, because this is not a thing a man should say across a room. I am not sick. I have no word for you about how much time is left in me, because I do not have one. And what happens to a person afterward is not mine to hand out. What I am talking about is smaller than any of that, and harder. There was a week coming for my family whether I looked at it or not, and I found 6 ways to take the weight off them before it came. My grandmother had a saying she used on us whenever we left a job half done. She would say, "Every stone you do not carry out of the path is a stone somebody smaller than you will trip over in the dark." She was not talking about stones. She meant that the things a person refuses to settle do not disappear. They only wait, and they wait in the place where the people who love him will walk. And my grandfather, who hardly spoke at all, told me the other half of it when I was still a young man. He said, "A man does his own carrying while his back is still good." That is the whole teaching, and it is the spine of the 6 things coming. Not one of them is about dying. Everyone is about hauling my own load off that path in the years I could still lift it. The first confession is the one that cost me the most. I paid the whole of it in the years when I was still earning, still doing seasonal work for a man who ran a gravel yard, and I paid it out a little at a time over 11 months from money my own hands were making. Not out of savings my family might need later, out of work. I wanted it to come out of the part of my life that was still producing something, and not out of the part that would be left behind. I remember the last month standing in that gravel yard in my coat, thinking about my grandmother in her kitchen in the middle of August with the sweat on her face, splitting wood nobody would need for 4 months. Everybody teased her for it. Nobody teases anybody on the night the snow comes. You cut and stack the winter wood in August. You do not go out in the dark with the axe when the first storm is already on the roof. Before the second one, a small piece of business, and then we go straight on. The native way is the little book where I put the rest of what the old ones handed me, the sayings and the plain thinking that would not fit into one sitting like this. The link for it is in the description below. It is quiet reading, the kind of thing you keep by the chair and open when a night runs long. No pressure at all from an old man. Whether you open it or you never do, I am with you the same, and I will be sitting right here tomorrow. That is enough of that. Now let me give you the second confession, and this one I had to do with my boots on. The second thing I settled was the ground. Not over a telephone, and not off a piece of paper on a desk. I drove out there on a Tuesday in the spring, and I walked it. I walked the whole of it, up the slope and back down again. The way you walk a field you are thinking of buying. I stood in 3 different places before I picked one. The first was too near the road, and I could hear the trucks come through in the low gear. The second was pretty, but water sat there in April, and you could read it in the color of the grass. The third had an old maple at the shoulder of it, and the wind came across from the west, and I stood in that spot with my hat in my hand for a long while. Then I said, "All right. This one. A man ought to stand in a field before he lies down in it." There was a young fellow out there with a clipboard who wanted to be helpful, and he kept saying, "Sir, we can take care of all of this inside where it is warm." I said, "Son, I have not stood in a field on a spring morning in 3 years, and you want me to do this in a chair." So he walked it with me. He did not say much the whole way, and at the end of it he told me I was the first one who had ever asked him to walk. My grandmother would not buy so much as a sack of seed without putting her hand down in it first. 15 minutes of walking on a Tuesday, and my children will never have to stand in an office at the worst hour of their lives, pointing at a map of ground none of them has ever seen, guessing at what their father would have wanted. The third was the words. I put down on paper what I wanted said about me. That took an afternoon. Then I sat with the pencil for 2 more days, because the harder half was setting down what I did not want said. Nobody is to call me a patient man. Patience was never in me. I was quick with my temper for 30 years, and everybody in that family knows it. And the last thing I want is my own children hearing somebody describe a man they never met. The story about the truck and the river stays out of it too. It is a funny story. It is also not true, and it has grown 2 feet every 10 years, and I would like it to stop. There is one line I do want spoken about their mother, and I will keep it to myself because it is hers. I read the page back out loud in the empty kitchen, and one sentence in it made me sound like a better man than I ever was, so I crossed it out. Better to be described in the size you actually were. Anything bigger is a stranger wearing your coat. The old ones used to say that the river names its own mouth long before it ever reaches the sea. All that water, all those miles, and the shape of the ending is decided way back up in the hills where nobody is watching. I decided mine up in the hills, in a kitchen, with a pencil. Number 4 was who to tell, and I came close to making a mess of the whole business. My first thought was to gather everybody, get all 4 of them around one table, say it once, be done with it. I even picked the weekend. Then I thought about what 4 people do with a single piece of news. Each one takes a corner of it. Each one remembers it a little differently, and inside of a year, you have 4 versions and a quarrel, and nobody can put a hand on the paper. So I told one. I told my daughter Ruth, because Ruth reads a thing all the way to the bottom of the page before she has an opinion about it. I sat her down and told her exactly where it is kept. The tin box on the second shelf of the front closet under the winter blankets. I made her go look at it while I stood there. I made her say it back to me. She asked me why her and not her brother. I told her I was not ranking my children. I was picking a branch. My grandfather hung a rope swing for us from one limb of an oak, only ever the one limb. He said a dozen thin branches will carry nothing at all, but one strong branch will carry every child in the county, one after another, all afternoon. Ruth is my strong branch. The others will hear it, and they will hear it from her, and there will be one version of it. One paper, one shelf, one daughter who knows her way to it in the dark without turning on a light. The 5th one was my own pride, and that took me longer than the ground and the words put together. Because it was done, and Ruth knew which shelf the paper sat on, but I would not tell her what it cost. She asked me twice. Both times I said, "That is handled," and turned the subject to the weather like a man closing a gate. I know why. Money is the last place a man keeps his dignity. If they know the number, they know what my work was worth by the end, and they know what I had left, and I could not stand the thought of my daughter doing arithmetic about her father. One evening in November, I took the receipt out of the tin box and laid it flat on the kitchen table in front of her, and said nothing at all. She read it. She looked up. And she said, "Dad, I have been afraid for 2 winters that there was nothing. 2 winters." She had carried that the whole time because I was protecting a feeling. My grandmother could look at a stand of pine and tell you which one was rotten inside. She said the pine that hides its rot is the one that comes down in the first real wind, and it never comes down in an empty field. It comes down on the house. I had been that pine, standing there looking fine. One more thing before the last confession, and it is about Harold. Harold and I worked together for 19 years. He was better company than I ever was. And Harold settled none of this. Not one of the six. He was not lazy and he was not a coward. He just believed there would be a later, the way we all believe there will be a later. I asked him about it once, sitting on his porch, the two of us watching the road. I said, "Harold, have you put anything down on paper at all?" He laughed and said he would get to it in the fall. He had said the same in the spring. And he was not lying to me. He was lying to himself, the easy way a comfortable man does it. What he left behind him was 2 years of arguing. 2 years, over the ground, over the money, over a sentence somebody thought he had said once at a table long back. His son and his daughter do not speak now. They have not spoken in 6 years, and the thing they stopped speaking over had nothing to do with either one of them. Harold loved those 2 children. Harold would have laid down in the road for either one of them. I do not say this to make Harold small. I say it because he was the kindest man I ever worked beside, and all that kindness never put one line down on paper for those 2 children. He just never wrote anything down. The 6th thing, and if you have room to carry only one of these home, carry this one, is that I gave away with my own hands the things I wanted people to have. Not on a list, not in a paper in a tin box for somebody to read out loud in a room where I am not sitting, by hand, while I could still see their faces. I gave my grandson the block plane my father used, on an ordinary Sunday in his kitchen with the coffee going. He turned it over about 4 times and said, "This is the one you would never let me touch." We both laughed, and then he got quiet, and he put his hand down on the back of mine. I will have that for the rest of my life. He will have it longer. I gave the good fishing rod to the boy across the road who mows for me, because nobody in my family fishes, and that boy is out there every Saturday with a rod held together with tape. He came over that same evening to thank me and stayed 2 hours. And I gave Ruth her mother's ring in October at that same table, and I watched her face do what it did. The tree gives its fruit while it is still standing. It does not wait until it is down on the ground and let whoever wanders by pick it up out of the wet grass. I want to say this next part carefully because I know how a list like this can land on a person. Naming these 6 things was not the same as hating myself for all the years I let them sit. I was well into my 70s and my 80s before I got to some of them. That is late. I sat on the Pride 1 for 2 winters while my daughter lay awake at night. That is a real cost, and I will not dress it up for you. But there is something I have learned about an old man and his own list. There is a difference between a thing you did and a thing you are. A thing you did can be carried back out to the truck and unloaded. A thing you are just sits down on top of you and stays. I settled these 6 not because I finally turned into a good father. I settled them because I finally sat still long enough to see what my not deciding was going to cost the people I love, and then I did 6 ordinary pieces of work about it. That is all. Plain work, done at a kitchen table. There was no lightning. I did not become somebody else that year. I am the same quick-tempered man who would not tell his own daughter a number. I only carried my own stones off the path, one at a time, while my back was still good enough to do it. And on the night I put the last of it in the tin box and shut the lid, I sat down in that kitchen feeling neither proud nor ashamed. I felt like a man who had put his tools away. Let me gather this up now, the way my grandmother gathered the ends of her shawl when the talking was done and it was time to walk home. I paid for it while I was still earning. I stood on the ground myself and chose it. I put on paper what should be said of me and what should never be said. I told one person and showed her the shelf it sits on. I quit hiding the cost and laid the receipt down in front of my daughter, and I handed the things over by hand while the faces were still in front of me. 6. Set your own life down next to that now, and do not be polite about it. Is there a week waiting for your family that you have not looked at yet? Is there a decision sitting in your house right now that somebody who loves you will have to make in a corridor at 2 in the morning, guessing at what you would have wanted? Who would they call first? Would they find the paper? Is there a paper? And the harder question, is there something you are keeping quiet out of pride that protects nobody at all, that only stands there inside you, looking fine, the way that pine looked fine? I know some of you are sitting there right now with a question you would not say out loud in front of anybody. Is it too late for me? I am 87. I cannot promise you a result, and I would not insult you by trying. What your family will do, and what any of this will ask of you, I have no way of knowing. But age does not take away the two things this needs. You can still notice one thing, and you can still make one ordinary choice about it today. In a chair, with a pencil. That is all I ever had. A pencil and one afternoon at a time. Now I would like to hear from you. Of the 6, tell me which number hit closest to home. The money, the ground, the words, the one person, the pride, or the giving with your own hands. Just the number down in the comments, and a line about why if you feel like it. I read every comment that comes to me, every one, and some nights that is the best hour of my whole day. And then come back and sit with me again tomorrow. I will have the fire going. Take care of yourself tonight.